Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the DR 4723 Applicants Briefing. My name is Rihanna Gonzalez, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for Disaster Recovery Programs at the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. Today, I am joined by various staff on the state side. I'd like to call out Mimi Weber. She's the Associate Deputy Commissioner for Disaster Assistance Programs. Joseph Colarafi is the Chief of Public Assistance for Field. Joe Stinson, Chief of Public Assistance for Administration, and our presenter today, Patricia Debley, who was one of our program admins in Public Assistance Field. First, I just want to take a moment to recognize the life lost and the devastation experienced by many of you personally and in the communities that you work and serve due to the July rainstorms. I want to thank our county, state, and federal partners for their partnership in securing this major disaster declaration that's going to bring assistance to many of us who were impacted, to many of our communities that were devastated by the July storms in New York State. I recognize that many of our county staff had to play a dual role in both response and recovery efforts in a very short time in order to move forward in securing the assistance that New York State deserved. In addition to the 8 counties that were initially granted public assistance in DR 4723, I'd like to announce that Franklin was added on to the declaration this morning. So again, thank you everyone for your service and your continued work that serves those of us in the community. With that, Tricia, take it away.
Thank you, Rihanna. Good afternoon and welcome to the Applicants Briefing for Disaster 4723. The federal declaration for the damages caused by the July 9th and 10th, 2023 flooding. My name is Patricia Debley. I am with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, or more commonly referred to the acronym DISHES, or DHSES, pronounced DISHES. This presentation should last approximately 90 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please place your questions in the chat and we will answer them upon completion of the presentation. This presentation, the narrative, will be posted on the DISHES website shown on this slide. I believe we also put it in the website information in the chat. We will be posting other pertinent information as it develops, so we urge you to visit the website frequently and take advantage of the information posted there. We have a lot of very important information to pass along to you today, so please mute your phones and laptops so that we can cover the material and everyone can hear the presentation. The federal government assigns a disaster number to every federally declared disaster, and the number for this New York disaster is 4723. There are some very important regulatory deadlines that must be met by applicants. Many of these deadlines are triggered by the declaration date. For Disaster 4723, that date is July 22nd, 2023. We will cover these deadlines later in this presentation. The incident period for Disaster 4723 is July 9th through July 10th, which means that all damages must have occurred on those dates and be a direct result of that flooding in order to be considered for eligibility by FEMA. In addition, certain emergency protective measures taken in anticipation of the storm may be eligible, even if they were performed prior to the incident period. The federal cost share is set at 75%, which means applicants will incur a 25% local cost share on their projects. While in many past disasters, the state has picked up a portion of the local share, this decision has not been made at this time. The FEMA Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide, commonly referred to as the PAPA-G, is in effect for 4723 is version 4. PAPA-G version 4 can be found on the FEMA.gov website, the DISHES website, and in the Resources tab of the Grants portal once you are approved as an applicant. PAPA-G version 4 is over 200 pages with another 50 pages of appendices. Please carefully consult the sections relevant to your project. This slide shows the key personnel assigned to manage Disaster 4723. Lai Sun Yi has been assigned as the Federal Coordinating Officer. DISH's Commissioner Jackie Bray is the Governor's authorized representative and state coordinating officer. DISH's Deputy Director of Recovery Programs, Brianna Gonzalez, is the alternate Governor's authorized representative and Deputy State Coordinating Officer, and Amuz Abramian is the Disaster Assistance Manager. This map shows the counties declared for Disaster 4723. As you can see on the map, Clinton, Dutchess, Essex, Franklin, Hamilton, Ontario, Orange, Putnam, and Rockland have validated damages over their county thresholds. What is public assistance? The key is to remember that the FEMA Public Assistance Program is a reimbursement program that provides financial assistance to eligible applicants recovering from the impact of the declared event. Disaster 4723 for the July 9th through 10th, 2023 flooding. Proper documentation of the work performed will be crucial to an effective and timely reimbursement process. This slide shows the FEMA public assistance process steps. We are now in the applicant briefing phase and will cover the remaining process steps in this presentation. The submission of the request for public assistance, or RPA, is one of the most important steps for applicants. The deadline for potential applicants to submit their RPAs to DISH's for Disaster 4723 ends on August 16, 2023. This will give DISH's time to review the RPA, coordinate any needed corrections with applicants, and submit the RPA to FEMA before the 30-day deadline of August 22, 2023. FEMA will deny late submissions unless the applicant and the state can clearly show that it was due to circumstances beyond their control. Simply stating that a key person was on vacation or you were occupied with other issues will not be sufficient, and FEMA does and will continue to deny late RPAs. We encourage you to act immediately on this requirement. The RPA packets for both governmental and private not-for-profit entities are available on our website. We will cover additional details on the RPA in this presentation. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact us immediately. Submit your RPA before the deadline, even if you are waiting to hear back from insurance or SBA. Do not wait to submit or to ask for assistance, if needed. As an applicant, you should immediately begin preparing your damage inventory if you have not already done so. When your RPA is approved, FEMA will assign a program delivery manager and DISH's will assign a state disaster assistance representative to assist you through the process. They will contact you to schedule an exploratory call to discuss your damages and needs and schedule the recovery scoping meeting. During the recovery scoping meeting, FEMA, the state, and the applicant will review the applicant's damage inventory and start formulating the damages into logical projects. The recovery scoping meeting triggers the 60-day clock for the applicant to formally identify all damages to FEMA. This is a hard deadline, and failure to meet it may result in damages that were identified late being denied. It is critical to record all damages on the applicant's damage inventory within the 60-day period. For damages identified after the 60-day period, applicants must submit a request on letterhead to the Disaster Assistance Manager. If there are valid reasons that precluded the timely identification of all damages, such as inaccessible damage sites, you must notify your FEMA state team immediately to arrange assessments of those sites as soon as possible. Please be aware that oversights, competing priorities, staff turnover, and poor record keeping or other circumstances within the applicant's control generally will not justify the addition of damages identified after the 60-day deadline. Applicants should already be undertaking a comprehensive survey of the damages and costs they incurred as a result of this disaster. For Disaster 4723, Category A and B projects will be submitted using FEMA's streamlined application process in Grants Portal. FEMA's goal is to conduct the exploratory call within 7 days of assigning a program delivery manager and to conduct the recovery scoping meeting within 21 days of the exploratory call. We will now cover eligibility criteria for Disaster 4723. This pyramid shows the tiers of eligibility. All 4 tiers must be eligible to obtain FEMA funding. We will cover all of these, starting with the bottom tier, eligible applicants. This slide shows the type of eligible applicants under the FEMA Public Assistance Program and should help you identify which category your organization falls into. State, local, and tribal applicants require only basic documentation to file their request for public assistance. For private nonprofit organizations, commonly referred to as PNPs, FEMA requires additional documentation. To begin with, PNPs must also provide documentation that shows they own or operate an eligible facility where eligible services are performed within a declared county in order to be an eligible applicant. This slide shows examples of nonprofit organizations or PNPs considered critical as they perform services of a governmental nature. When FEMA approves a critical PNP, they are eligible for all categories of work. This slide shows examples of PNPs considered essential but not critical. Such applicants, when approved, are eligible for emergency work, categories A and B. However, for a non-critical PNP to be eligible for permanent work, categories C through G, the applicant must apply to the Small Business Administration for a loan. If the Small Business Administration loan is denied for qualifying reasons or the amount of the loan the applicant qualifies for is insufficient to cover the eligible damages, the applicant can seek reimbursement from FEMA for damages not covered by Small Business Administration. Applicants who intend to submit for damages for permanent work categories should submit their Small Business Administration loan request immediately. Don't miss this Small Business Administration loan application submission deadline. Check the Small Business Administration website shown on this slide to locate the loan submission deadline. In addition, all applicants who have damages that may be covered by insurance should submit a claim to their insurance carrier as soon as possible. This slide shows the minimum required documentation that must accompany the request for public assistance packet for all private nonprofit applicants. Applicants must identify the eligible services provided at their facility. Eligible PNP services are listed in the Papa G version 4. FEMA may also ask for additional information if they deem it necessary to confirm the applicant's eligibility. The next tier of eligibility is the facility. Facility is defined as any publicly or PNP-owned building, work, system, or equipment, or certain improved and maintained natural features. Unimproved areas such as fields or natural stream banks are not eligible. In order to be eligible, the facility must be the legal responsibility of the applicant, have damages caused by July 9th through 10th, 2023 flooding, be in use at the time of the disaster, and not under the authority of another federal agency. For FHWA roads, however, FEMA will cover eligible debris removal and emergency protective measures if not covered by FHWA. For a PNP facility to be eligible, the facility must have been in use for an eligible purpose at the time of the declared event. For work to be eligible for the FEMA PA program, it must be required as a direct result of the declared disaster. The legal responsibility of an eligible applicant, located in a declared county, completed within regulatory timeframes, which we'll cover in the next slide, and authorized in the declaration. Another significant deadline initially triggered by the declaration date is the deadline for completing the work on an approved project. This is known as the activity completion date, also known as the period of performance. For emergency work, categories A and D, applicants have 6 months from the declaration date to complete the approved scope of work. New York State can grant an additional 6-month extension for emergency work for a total of 12 months from the declaration date. For permanent work, or category C through G, applicants have 18 months from the declaration date to complete the approved scope of work. New York State can grant an additional 30 months for a total of 4 years from the declaration date. New York State cannot grant time extensions for temporary facilities. All requests for time extensions within the state's authority must be submitted in grants portal by clicking the request extension link under the activity completion deadline in your project. You will be prompted to provide the justification for the time extension. All requests for time extensions that exceed the state's authority must be submitted in writing to the DAM or Disaster Assistance Manager and will be forwarded with the state's recommendation to FEMA for determination. Such requests must provide documentation of delays beyond the applicant's control, a detailed justification for the delay, the current status of the work, and a project timeline with a projected completion date. Please remember that the activity completion date or the period of performance deadline is solely for completing the approved scope of work on the project. Project submission deadlines and closeout deadlines are addressed elsewhere in this presentation. See Papa G version 4, pages 196 and 197. This slide shows the categories of work under the FEMA PA program. As you can see, they are broken into 2 major categories: emergency work, categories A and B, and permanent work, categories C through G. Debris removal may be eligible when the debris presents an immediate threat to public safety and improved property, such as trees and branches in a public road. FEMA requires detailed information, and FEMA environmental specialists will review these projects to look for compliance with the National Environmental Protection Act and other environmental laws, policies, and executive orders. Please make sure that you document your work thoroughly to include the type of debris, amount of each type, location it was taken from, location taken to, including temporary staging sites, and the final disposition of the debris, such as whether it was chipped in place, taken to a landfill, placed in a DPW stockpile, etc. You may be required to document that the debris is the direct result of the declared event and not a pre-existing condition. Various criteria apply to different types of debris removal. For detailed information on the eligibility of debris removal, please see Papa G version 4, pages 99 through 109. FEMA also has a 1-hour YouTube video called Understanding PA Debris Removal at https://www.youtube.com/WATCH?V=WALLYPPAMM4, which you can see this when we upload this presentation to our website. Any debris on private property is normally the responsibility of the property owner. However, the applicant may elect to remove debris brought to the municipal right-of-way by residents, and FEMA can pay for the removal from that point. FEMA's alternative procedure for debris removal authorizes reimbursement for straight-time force account labor performing eligible debris removal. Just include such costs in your streamlined project application. Category B emergency protective measures are measures taken before, during, and after an event that save lives, protect public health and safety, or eliminate an immediate threat of significant damage to improve public-private property. Just a few examples of such measures are shown on the slide. Many more are addressed in the Papa G. FEMA now considers the time an applicant takes to resolve an immediate threat when evaluating whether the measure is eligible for your reimbursement. Please take this into account when planning your emergency protective measures, as unnecessary delays may jeopardize your reimbursement. For details on the eligibility of various emergency protective measures, please see Papa G version 4, pages 110 through 139. This slide shows the criteria relevant to permanent work repairs. An important factor to consider when developing permanent work projects are any mandated codes and standards and any consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards that may apply to the work. Sometimes disaster-related damages trigger repairs to a facility that go beyond restoring the facility to pre-disaster design, function, and capacity. When these improvements are mandated by formally adopted codes and standards, they may be reimbursable. Upgrades merely suggested or recommended by authorities or industry practice may not be eligible as a mandated code or standard, but they may be eligible as part of a cost-effective hazard mitigation where appropriate. Please see G version 4, pages 145 to 153 for criteria relating to code standards, regulations, and permits. FEMA has made the application of consensus-based code specification and standards mandatory for certain types of repair work. For further information on this policy, please refer to the FEMA Recovery Interim Policy FP-104-009-11, version 2. The intent of mandating consensus-based codes and specification standards measures is to increase resiliency, protect lives and property, and reduce the cost of future events. FEMA Policy FP-104-009-11, version 2 is effective for Disaster 4723. A copy of the Consensus-Based Code Specification Standards Policy is available on the DISH's Recovery website for Disaster 4723. The appendix to that policy lists all the FEMA recognized Consensus-Based Code Specification Standards publications, organized by the type of work they apply to. If you use a code or standard that is not listed in the appendix, but has the same or similar requirements as a listed publication, please provide a comparison of the relevant provisions to support your reimbursement for your project. The Consensus-Based Code Specification and Standards Policy applies to permanent repairs to buildings, electric power, roads and bridges, potable water, and wastewater systems. We recommend that you employ the use of an engineer to assist in determining what standards apply to any repairs that you undertake that fall into one of the Consensus-Based Code Specification and Standards categories. The FEMA Consensus-Based Code Specification Standards Policy must be reviewed prior to finalizing the scope of work, as any Consensus-Based Code Specification Standards triggered will have to be identified in the scope of work and the cost added to the project by the CRC. If these codes are not triggered in the repair, the applicant must attach a signed statement to the project documentation attesting that they have reviewed the FEMA policy and consensus-based code specification standards do not apply. If consensus-based codes are triggered, the applicant must clearly identify the applicable codes and add them to the scope of work. FEMA will require a written, signed, and stamped certification from an engineer or other qualified individual that any applicable consensus-based code specification standards have been applied. Once the project is completed, the applicant must attach the statement to the project document section in Grants Portal. The engineering costs are eligible for reimbursement if they are reasonable and necessary. Again, we urge that you consult with an engineer if you have any damages to these types of facilities. The first permanent work category is Category C, which covers repair or replacement for roads and bridges. It may include facilities that are adjacent to damaged roads like sidewalks, streetlights, culverts, or drainage channels. The FEMA Public Assistance Program does not cover the cost of permanent repairs on FHWA roads. The cost for eligible emergency work may be reimbursed by FEMA. New York State DOT is responsible for coordinating repairs on FHWA roads and requesting an emergency recovery or ER from FHWA. Please coordinate with the New York State DOT Region ER Coordinator for any damages on FHWA roads. FEMA policy, Public Assistance Guidance on Inundated and Submerged Roads Policy, FP 104-009-13, clarifies the eligibility of funding for public roads inundated by floodwaters directly related to a major disaster declared under the Stafford Act. Damages must be visible to the naked eye and a direct result of disaster 4723, the July 9th through 10th, 2023 flooding. Subsurface damages, even if validated by soil boring, sampling, or ground penetrating radar, are not eligible without visible surface damages. Any damages that appear to be traffic-induced or general deterioration, such as potholes or fatigue cracking, would be considered ineligible for FEMA's public assistance. Opening a road prematurely can cause damages by normal traffic that would not be covered by FEMA. Applicants need to allow sufficient time for saturated soil to dry out before reopening roads that have been inundated. Exceptions to this guidance include surface damage caused by emergency vehicles performing eligible debris removal or other emergency work necessary as the result of the disaster, or certain permanent work repairs as related to closed basin flooding. A copy of the Public Assistance Guidance on Inundated and Submerged Roads Policy is available on the Dishes Recovery website under Disaster 4723 webpage. Private roads, including homeowners association roads, are not eligible for FEMA public assistance. The next category of permanent work is Category D, which encompasses water control facilities such as dams, levees, canals, and spillways. As with all categories of work, it is important to document damages related to the declared event and be able to distinguish them from pre-existing conditions. For example, storm runoff may contribute sediment to an engineered channel. To be eligible for reimbursement, the applicant will need to document the pre-disaster capacity of the facility and show regularly scheduled maintenance. FEMA will only reimburse for removal of the sediment directly attributable to the declared event. Maintenance logs and photographs that document the condition of a facility prior to the declared event may be helpful in establishing eligibility. Category E covers buildings and equipment, including building contents. For the purpose of the Public Assistance Program, equipment refers to tangible property with a useful life of more than 1 year and at unit cost of $5,000 or more. Applicants must promptly file insurance claims for any covered property. Category F covers public utilities such as power distribution systems, water and sewer systems, and wastewater treatment plants. And the final category is Category G, which covers parks, recreational facilities, beaches, municipally owned rail systems, and any other eligible damages that are not covered by the other categories of work. Special considerations cover several elements that can require significant attention to avoid jeopardizing reimbursement. We will cover each of these elements in this presentation, but you should also discuss them with your assigned FEMA state team as you develop your project to ensure they are addressed appropriately in the context of your specific claims. FEMA environmental and historic preservation specialists perform compliance reviews on all projects to ascertain whether the applicant has met applicable federal environmental and historic preservation laws, policies, and executive orders. These reviews typically occur prior to the project obligation and again at closeout. Applicants must obtain all required permits for their projects from the appropriate regulatory agencies, which may involve the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and other agencies. See Papa G version 4, pages 141 through 144 for additional information. Please pay particular attention to these requirements, as FEMA can deny funding on your project for non-compliance. Again, if you're not sure about what you can and cannot do, please ask for guidance before you act. Applicants must comply with both federal and state legal requirements While some state requirements, such as the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or CEQA, mandate certain procedures that are not identical to federal requirements, and you must still ensure that the requirement of the National Environment Protection Act, or NEPA, are met. For example, in a past disaster, a school relocated a building and conducted the CEQA process, but failed to complete the NEPA review, and FEMA de-obligated the $500,000 project. So again, we urge you to make sure you follow all the requirements and ask for guidance if you're not certain how to proceed. Several statutes, executive orders, and regulations establish requirements to protect the environment and preserve the nation's historic and prehistoric resources. Historic sites require consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office and the Tribal Historic Preservation as appropriate, and the applicant is responsible for complying with all applicable federal, state, territorial, or tribal EHP laws, even if FEMA is not providing TA funding for all the work. Please keep in mind that historic sites are not limited to building-type structures. There may be other facilities that have historical significance. Any structure that is 45 years or older must be reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office, known by the acronym SHPO, and sometimes by the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, known by the acronym SIPO. Before repairs can be made, an applicant needs to make every effort to afford FEMA the opportunity to perform EHP reviews prior to the start of construction for any permanent work project. Proceeding with permanent work before FEMA completes EHP reviews jeopardizes TA funding. Applicants must provide adequate supporting documentation for these projects, and it is the applicant's responsibility to substantiate eligibility of their work and costs. It bears repeating that applicants should seek appropriate guidance before proceeding, as failure to comply with all applicable federal, state, territorial, or tribal EHP laws may result in loss of funds and potential penalties that could cost you, the applicant, dearly. Floodplains and floodways provide a measure of protection for residents and improve property from flooding events. Floodplains allow rising floodwaters to dissipate along the area adjacent to the waterways, and floodways are the conduits for removing the water following the flood. Wetlands protect the environment and provide some protection from high water events. Performing any work in these areas is severely limited. Please make sure that you are aware of these areas within your jurisdiction and you follow all appropriate guidelines. See Papa G version 4, pages 149 through 151. Again, see guidance before you act. The Coastal Barrier Resource Act requires consultation with the Department of State and imposes strict limitations on construction and repairs within those areas covered by the Act. FEMA is prohibited from duplicating benefits, so FEMA deducts all other sources of funding used for the scope of work on your project from your FEMA grant. The most common additional funding source is insurance. However, any other source, such as federal or state grants and monetary contributions from any source, private or public, must also be deducted. The Public Assistance Program also imposes a mandatory obtain and maintain insurance provision on all insurable damages that exceed $5,000. See Papa G version 4, pages 144 through 145. Failure to comply with this provision will jeopardize FEMA funding and render the facility ineligible for public assistance in the future. Proof of compliance will be required prior to project closeout. If your facility is in a floodplain, you must have flood insurance. If you do not, FEMA will take a mandatory deduction equal to what the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, would have paid. For buildings, it is the maximum of $500,000, and for contents, it is the maximum of $500,000. Damages that occur below grade are not subject to the NFIP mandatory deduction. Again, we urge all applicants who have insurance policies to submit their claims as soon as possible. Section 406 mitigation refers to Section 406 of the Stafford Act and is the mitigation that is applied to facilities damaged as a result of the declared disaster. This slide shows common mitigation measures, but there are many more, and the FEMA state staff can assist you in developing appropriate measures for your project. See Papa G version 4, pages 153 through 161. Hazard mitigation has proven to be effective in reducing damages from future events and reducing costs to applicants and taxpayers. We are strong proponents of mitigation and recommend that applicants consider applying mitigation to their permanent work projects whenever it's cost effective and makes good sense. FEMA mitigation specialists will be available to provide guidance on developing appropriate mitigation measures. FEMA must first determine that the proposed mitigation is cost effective based on one of the three criteria: the 15% rule, the 100% rule, or a benefit cost analysis, or BCA. Mitigation costing 15% or less of the cost to repair in kind is generally deemed cost effective. Specific types of mitigation identified in the policy may cost up to 100% of the cost to repair in kind and still be deemed cost effective. Finally, for facilities that are subjected to repeated damages, a BCA may justify mitigation costs that exceed the cost to repair in kind. In order to evaluate cost effectiveness, the applicant must provide separate estimates for mitigation and repair in kind so that FEMA can compare them. Once mitigation is approved, it becomes part of the approved scope of work and the scope of work of the project and must be completed. If an applicant determines that it is unable to proceed with an approved mitigation measure for any reason, the applicant must submit a request for the scope of work change to the Disaster Assistance Manager and receive approval from FEMA before you proceed with your project. Failure to comply may jeopardize your funding. Another mitigation program is found Section 404 of the Stafford Act, which provides funding for mitigation measures that do not have to be related to damages caused by the disaster. The total funding available for 404 mitigation is based on the total damage cost of the declared disaster. Facilities throughout the state are eligible to compete for Section 404 funding, even if they are not located in the declared county. DISH's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program staff will provide notice of funding opportunities to all counties and guide applicants through the hazard mitigation process. If you are interested in Section 404 mitigation opportunities or have questions, please contact our hazard mitigation staff using the contact information shown on this slide. And the final tier of eligibility is eligible costs. These include the cost for your own employees, equipment, materials, and supplies purchased or taken from stock, and properly contracted services to perform eligible work. Management costs are those costs applicants incur for the administrative work performed to submit their public assistance projects to FEMA. We will discuss management costs later in this presentation. Cost eligibility is covered in Papa G version 4, chapter 6. FEMA will review every project to ensure the work performed was reasonable and necessary to address disaster-related damages, and will apply the appropriate deductions for any funding received for the same work from other sources, such as insurance proceeds. For the applicant's employees, their salary or hourly rate plus fringe rates are reimbursable for hours spent performing eligible work. FEMA may require the applicant to provide a fringe rate for both regular and overtime pay for their employees. For emergency work, the applicant's budgeted employee costs are generally eligible only for overtime while engaged in the eligible emergency work. There is an exception, however, for debris removal, where the applicant can also claim reimbursement for straight time. For temporary employees performing eligible emergency work, both straight time and overtime are eligible. For permanent work projects, both straight time and overtime are eligible for all the applicant's employees engaged in performing the approved scope of work. Force account labor costs are covered in Papa G version 4, pages 68 through 72. Force account equipment is equipment you own, purchase, or lease, which is used for eligible work. Equipment is generally reimbursed based on hours of usage. FEMA will give credit for a full workday if equipment is used for half the regular workday or more. For example, a Department of Public Works driver drives a truck with a trailer and loader to a project site and then uses the loader to work at the project for 5 hours, loads it back on the trailer, and drives back to the DPW yard. The truck and trailer are only credited with the actual hours in transit to and from the project site, but the loader that was used for the 5 hours can be credited for a full workday since it was used for more than half the workday. FEMA cost codes establish hourly equipment rates. For leased or rented equipment, reimbursement is based on the rental lease agreement. When it is necessary to purchase equipment to perform eligible work, FEMA may reimburse the purchase price and use the equipment based on the equipment cost codes or the actual fuel and maintenance costs. However, salvage value must be deducted once the purchased equipment is no longer used for federally funded programs or projects. Guidance on eligible equipment costs and disposition is covered in Papa G version 4, pages 72 through 76. Force account materials such as road flares, emergency blankets or rations, road salt, gravel, construction materials, etc., are those you use from your stock or purchase from the eligible project. If you use materials from stock, you can document the cost by using invoices, if available, or obtain 3 quotes from local vendors to establish the replacement cost. Items taken from stock must be tracked with inventory and usage records. You do not have to replace the materials taken from stock and used on your FEMA project before claiming reimbursement for those materials. See Papa G version 4, pages 74 through 76 for guidance on force account materials and disposition requirements. Donated resources are labor, materials, and/or equipment donated by a third party. For emergency work, categories A and B, the value of donated resources can be credited to the total combined local share of all applicants' emergency work projects. For example, the applicant has 5 emergency work projects totaling $500,000. The total local share of the 5 projects would be $125,000. If the applicant assumes the entire local share, the applicant can claim up to $125,000 in donated resources. For permanent work, however, donated resources can only be applied to the project they are donated for. For example, the applicant has a permanent work project for $100,000 and received $40,000 in donated materials that are used on the project. The applicant can only apply $25,000 of that material since the local share in the project is $25,000. The remaining $15,000 cannot be used to offset the local share of another project. Please be certain to document all details relevant to donated resources. For more information on donated resources, please see Papa G version 4, pages 88 through 89. All purchases and contracts must meet all local, state, and federal procurement requirements. Please pay particular attention to mandatory contract provisions identified in 2 CFR Part 200, Appendix 2. If some procurement procedures are suspended due to an emergency declaration, FEMA will require the applicant to justify the scope and duration of the suspension. FEMA reviews purchases and contracts for compliance, so make sure your documentation is in order. Procurement and contractor requirements are covered in Papa G version 4, chapter 8. As stated on the last slide, all contracts must meet local, state, and federal procurement requirements. FEMA will review all contracts for compliance. If the contract is found to be non-compliant, FEMA may deny the project. Competitively bid contracts with a fixed cost and well-defined scope of work are preferred. Applicants who use mutual aid will have to comply with the provisions of those mutual aid agreements. If the agreements do not call for reimbursement to the provider, FEMA will not reimburse the mutual aid, but the applicant may be able to use the aid provided as donated resources. If the agreements do call for reimbursement to the providing entity, the entity must bill the applicant for eligible costs, who will then pay the provider and submit those costs to FEMA for reimbursement. If mutual aid resources are deployed to assist but do not get utilized to perform eligible work, no costs are eligible, including the cost for mobilization and demobilization. Lump sum contracts are acceptable and easy to monitor as they do not require the applicant to document the quantity used. Time and material contracts can be used but require additional control measures. They must be reasonable and contain a cap, such as not to exceed $200,000 or not to exceed 70 hours of work, which the contractor violates at their own risk. The idea behind time and material contracts is to allow the applicant to respond quickly to an emergency. For scopes of work that will be performed over a longer period, applicants are expected to comply with normal procedures to procure contracts. Be aware of types of contracts that may jeopardize reimbursement. A cost plus percentage of cost contract is where a contractor says they will do the work for whatever it costs them, plus a percentage of that cost. For example, the contractor spends $100,000 on the work, and the percentage agreed on is 15%. The contractor receives $115,000. In this type of contract, there is no incentive for the contract to work efficiently and swiftly. The more costs they incur, the larger their profit. This is an ineligible contract, and FEMA may make your project ineligible if you use it. Don't refer to FEMA reimbursement in making your contract. Making a contract contingent on reimbursement from FEMA will make it ineligible for reimbursement from FEMA. Do not contract with a debarred contractor. In addition, FEMA advises against the use of cooperative purchasing programs and piggyback contracts due to frequent compliance issues with federal procurement requirements. Federal procurement regulations have a requirement to actively solicit minority and women-owned business enterprises. The requirement does not mean simply putting a notice in the newspapers as part of your bid process. For example, language in a publication that says MWBE enterprises are encouraged to reply does not satisfy the requirement to actively solicit them. You need to identify MWBE contractors in your area and show active solicitation via email, telephone contact, or regular mail, and invite them to bid on your project. Failure to do so may make your project ineligible. The use of engineering services is encouraged for complex projects. Please make sure that the engineering design is limited to pre-disaster conditions plus eligible codes and standards. If mitigation is included on the project, that work should be identified and estimated separately. Estimates must provide unit costs for each component of the approved scope of work, not a lump sum amount. Applicant estimates must be prepared by a licensed professional engineer or other estimated professions and must be signed, stamped, and certified as being prepared in accordance with industry standards for FEMA to accept them. For more information, see Papa G, pages 186 through 187, and Appendix L. Next, we will discuss Category Z projects. FEMA will reimburse an applicant's direct and indirect administrative costs incurred for submitting and processing its FEMA project. Reimbursement is based on actual documented administrative costs and is capped at 5% of the total of your obligated project, minus donated resources projects. Please submit your streamlined project application for Category Z management costs in Grants Portal. Applicants must submit full documentation of management costs at closeout. The federal share in Cat Z projects is 100%, subject to the 5% cap based on 100% of the total obligated projects, not the 75% federal share. The management cost policy is contained in FEMA's interim policy 104-11-2. Public Assistance Management Cost Interim, and FEMA's Public Assistance Management Cost Standard Operating Procedures. There's also guidance on this process available in the Resources section of Grants Portal. This slide shows some of the eligible management costs. Please begin capturing your administrative costs, including the costs incurred to attend today's applicant briefing. You will need to document your administrative costs before requesting closeout and reimbursement for your CASB project. Some applicants in recent disasters have declined claiming CASB costs as they could not document these costs. So start documenting them now. Reimbursement can only be claimed for management costs incurred during the applicant's authorized CASB period of performance, which is defined by whichever of the following occurs first. 180 days after the applicant completes its last non-management cost project, or 180 days after the latest performance period of the applicant's non-management cost project, or 8 years from the date of the major disaster declaration. Currently, the activity completion deadline period of performance for CASB projects in Grants Portal and EMI may be inconsistent and generally incorrect. You must use the period performance criteria discussed on this slide to understand when the deadline for submitting your CASB project for closeout is triggered. DSHS must submit its recommendation on the applicant's CASB closeout to FEMA within 180 days of the expiration of the applicant's CASB period of performance. So applicants should submit all their CASB closeout documentation to DSHS within 90 days of their CASB period of performance. This slide shows an overview of the steps in the FEMA's public assistance process. Please be aware that FEMA uses a combination of the Grants Manager Grants Portal database system and the EMI database system. Grants Manager is the FEMA side of this database, and Grants Portal is the applicant side. Grants Manager, Grants Portal are used to submit and process an applicant's request for public assistance, damage inventory, initial project development, and any state authorized time extensions. EMI is used for project obligations, post-obligation amendments, FEMA authorized time extensions, and closeout. At some point in the future, FEMA plans to migrate all EMI functionality to the Grants Manager Grants Portal. There are 4 phases of the public assistance projects under the FEMA's delivery model. Each phase contains multiple steps. The process begins with damage assessments immediately after an incident occurs and culminates with project obligation, completion, and closeout. We are now in phase 1 at the applicant briefing. To participate in a FEMA disaster recovery, applicants must establish a Grants Portal account. Grants Portal is the applicant side of the database where FEMA projects are now developed. It replaced FEMA's old database, which was called EMI. Many applicants have established Grants Portal accounts as a result of participating in the COVID-19 declaration. All projects and documentation are now submitted through Grants Portal. Once an RPA is approved, you can proceed with the recovery scoping meeting and start to formulate projects in Grants Portal. Currently, projects are still obligated in FEMA's old database, EMI, but that functionality will migrate to Grants Manager in the future. For emergency work, Cat A and B, emergency protective measures, there's a streamlined application format in Grants Portal for applicants to utilize. Applicants must create their damage inventory list for all permanent work projects. FEMA's delivery model segregates site inspections, initial project development, and reviews conducted by consolidated resource centers. DSHS assigns disaster assistance representatives, otherwise known as DARs, to all applicants to assist you with the recovery. Coordination between applicants, DSHS, and FEMA is critical for successful TA projects. Recovery may involve a variety of complex projects and issues. Both FEMA and the state employ personnel to assist applicants with more complex projects. There are various elements of a project that will be necessary to develop in order to process your project. It is important things to remember to thoroughly document all the information to support your project. This includes an applicant's decision-making process, invoices, contracts, insurance policies, claims and settlements, actual costs, photos, personnel policies, procurement documentation, proof of payment, permit applications and responses, etc. If you do not provide the required documentation, FEMA may issue a request for information and withhold reimbursement until you comply. FEMA and DISH's representatives will be available to assist applicants with developing their project. You must provide a complete list of all your damages to FEMA within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting. A late damage request must be submitted with justification to the Disaster Assistance Manager for all damages identified after the 60 days, and FEMA has discretion to deny any damage identified after that deadline. This slide lists the normal site inspection process. Site inspections are not required for 100% completed work projects. If there are damages that require a site inspection, FEMA site inspectors will inspect those damages. These inspections may be in person or virtual, depending on the circumstances. Therefore, it is important that you capture all the necessary information to document your damages, to include photographs, GPS locations, quantities and dimensions, site access issues, environmental or historic preservation issues, and mitigation opportunities. The site inspection results in a site inspection report. Make certain that the site inspection report fully and accurately captures all relevant damage information. FEMA has several consolidated resource centers located throughout the country. Disaster declarations for New York are supported by the CRC Atlantic, which is in Puerto Rico. CRC operations are divided up by lanes based on the type of projects they handle. There are three methods for estimating project costs: applicant estimates, FEMA estimates, and expert panel review. See Papa G version 4, pages 183 through 189. FEMA will accept an estimate provided by an applicant that contains the necessary details as shown on the slide. FEMA may request additional information if the information provided is insufficient for them to validate the estimate. Estimates prepared by licensed engineers must be signed and stamped by the engineer. Make sure that any unique issues that may impact on the project estimate are identified. For example, we had a situation where the project was estimated using a large crane, but discovered later that the crane could not access the work site via the roadway, and we had to switch to a barge mounted crane to access the site from the water side, significantly increasing the cost. FEMA prepares estimates using the cost estimating format for work on a large project that is less than 90% complete at the time the estimate is prepared. All estimates are reviewed by FEMA DISH's team and the applicant before they are sent to the Consolidated Resource Center for review and validation. On projects with a federal share of $25 million or more, FEMA will engage an independent third-party expert panel to evaluate cost estimates to determine if the cost estimates are required, but the panel does not make eligibility determinations. Applicants can request the use of an expert panel for projects where the federal share will exceed $5 million. FEMA establishes project thresholds for each disaster. You must meet a minimum monetary threshold for an eligible project. In order to qualify, a project must have eligible costs of at least $3,800. All projects are then categorized as either a small project or a large project. Small projects are those under $1 million, and large projects are those at or over $1 million. Let's discuss some differences between small projects and large projects and the requirements for each. Small projects are obligated and paid based on the approved cost estimate. Once approved, small projects are generally not amended to reflect changes in actual costs unless the applicant successfully appeals for a small project reconciliation. Applicants must promptly submit the completed P4 to the dam as soon as the work is completed to trigger closeout of the small project. With a significant increase to the small project threshold, applicants are advised to exercise care in developing their estimates. Large projects, on the other hand, must be paid based on actual costs, so they require a formal accounting process for closeout. Where appropriate, applicants may request progress payments for the portion of work on a large project that is already completed and fully documented, including necessary permits and proofs of payment. Applicant must promptly submit the completed P4 form to the dam as soon as all the work on the large project is complete to trigger the large project final accounting process. At that point, DISH's personnel will coordinate with the applicant to review all supporting documentation for the project and make a recommendation to FEMA regarding final payment and closure on the large project. Also, applicants are required to submit quarterly progress reports on all their large projects as long as the projects remain open. The Disaster Assistance Manager will prompt you to submit this report each quarter. DISH's will also provide additional briefings to applicants that specifically address quarterly progress report and closeout requirements. There are several standard items that FEMA typically deems necessary to support most projects. When you are working on developing your project, make sure you have the necessary documentation. Again, we cannot stress enough the importance of documenting all your actions and costs in support of your project. Failure to do so will jeopardize your FEMA funding. FEMA has established a standard sampling policy for situations where a significant amount of documentation supports the project. Applicants will provide summary lists for each category, and FEMA will select an appropriate sample. The sample size will be 105 documents per category. Applicants will be required to provide 100% of the backup documentation for any category that has 105 documents or less. Capped projects offer some alternatives to a traditional repair-in-kind projects. The three types of capped projects are alternate projects, improved projects, and Section 428 projects. In each, funding is capped at the estimated cost to repair in kind, but the approved scope of work allows some flexibility. We will discuss each of these options on the upcoming slide. If an applicant decides they do not want to repair a damaged facility and can demonstrate that it is in the best interest of the community to use the funds for a different purpose, they may request an alternate project. In many cases, the alternate project is used to purchase necessary equipment for the municipality. Another possibility is to use those funds to offset the mandatory NFIP deduction on another of the applicant's projects. The alternate project must be approved by both DISH's and FEMA before the applicant can proceed. The applicant is also responsible for rendering the original damaged facility safe and secure. The alternate project is capped at the repair cost of the original damaged facility. Alternate projects are only available for permanent work projects, categories C through G. The capped amount will not include the cost of any mitigation considered for the original damaged facility because FEMA funding is not being used to mitigate the damages to that facility. Another option to traditional repair-in-kind projects is the scope of work that goes beyond returning the facility to pre-disaster condition in order to enhance the facility to meet the applicant's current needs. An improved project is appropriate when it is not possible to separate the cost of eligible repairs from improvements being made in conjunction with those repairs. For example, a municipality seeks to restore a damaged two-bay firehouse and simultaneously upgrade it to a 3-bay firehouse under a single construction contract. FEMA may approve this scope of work, but will only reimburse up to the amount it would cost to return the facility to the pre-disaster condition. Applicants may request an improved project only for permanent work projects. Keep in mind that the improved project must be approved by DISHES and FEMA before the applicant can proceed with the work. Additionally, if the applicant wishes to apply mitigation to the project, FEMA will only pay for the mitigation on the damaged portion of the facility. The improved project is capped at the cost of the original repair plus approved mitigation on the disaster damage portion of the facility. The entire project is subject to FEMA EHP review, including the portion of work that is not being funded by FEMA. In the third and final option to traditional repair in kind projects, Section 428 of the Stafford Act allows for alternative procedures wherein an applicant can elect to accept a fixed cost offer from FEMA in lieu of actual costs for large permanent work projects. There are some benefits to this program, but also some downsides. On the benefit side, it allows for some flexibility in performing the repairs and does not require tracking of materials to each specific damaged site. On the downside, if you run into unforeseen complications that cause you to go over budget, you cannot go back to FEMA for additional funds. If you are considering this option, please advise your FEMA state team immediately so that we may provide you with detailed information before you make a commitment. Applicants must accept a fixed cost offer within 18 months of the disaster declaration date, which for disaster 4723 is January 22nd, 2025. The 428 program offers some flexibility regarding the use of funds. The example FEMA gives in the Papa G involves a winding road with 5 culverts carrying it over a waterway. All 5 culverts are damaged by the storm, and the applicant wishes to replace the 5 culverts with a single bridge. In some circumstances, this flexibility may benefit the applicant. 428 projects also require the execution of a funding agreement between the applicant and DISHES. There are some drawbacks, such as limitation on appeals, that will be discussed later in this presentation. Again, if you're interested, notify your FEMA state team so you can receive appropriate guidance prior to making your final decision. The Recovery Transition Meeting provides an opportunity for the applicant to review their projects with FEMA and DISHES field personnel in order to make sure that all the eligible damages and work undertaken has been captured in one or more projects and submitted into Grants Portal. It is at this point that you'll be transitioned to the DISHES Disaster Assistance Manager, who will then be your primary point of contact for any further actions that may be necessary, including scope of work change requests, quarterly reports, time extension requests, and closeouts. When FEMA obligates your project, you will receive a project obligation notification from DISHES in the form of an email with attachments. It will include a copy of your approved project and the P4 form you will use to certify project completion. Please make sure you promptly return this form as soon as your project is complete, so DISHES can submit it to FEMA and have the project closed in the system. Receipt of the project obligation notification email also starts a 60-day clock for any appeal on that obligation. So please review the approved versions of your project promptly and closely when you receive the notification and make sure everything is in order. If it's not, please contact the Disaster Assistance Manager immediately. All projects must be closed. Generally speaking, small projects do not require a formal accounting, but the applicant must submit the signed P4 project completion form to the dam immediately when the project is complete. Please track your project carefully and submit the P4 as soon as each project is completed. For large projects, submitting the P4 triggers a formal accounting process. The applicants must submit the signed P4 immediately upon completion of the large project and be prepared to provide all supporting documentation for the project. Please coordinate with your Disaster Assistance Manager and manage your project to ensure compliance. DISHES will offer additional briefings to applicants focusing on the quarterly progress reporting and closeout process. The work completion date is the day an applicant physically completes the authorized scope of work. Once an applicant completes the authorized scope of work, they must promptly submit the project to DISHES for closeout by submitting the signed P4 form to the Disaster Assistance Manager. For Disaster 4723, Amu Subramium is the Disaster Assistance Manager. Delay in completing the closeout process may jeopardize your FEMA funding. It is very important to adhere to the approved scope of work on your project, or you will jeopardize your FEMA funding. As soon as you are aware of any need to change the approved scope of work, you must request review and approval of the change from FEMA through DISHES. You must receive written approval from FEMA before you can proceed with the change in the scope of work, or once again, you can jeopardize your project. Your written request to the Disaster Assistance Manager should include detailed changes to the scope and cost estimate, reason for the change, and a construction timeline for project schedule. You should also consider whether the request should include an extension of the activity completion period of performance date. See Papa G, version 4, pages 194 through 195. FEMA regulations impose deadlines for submission of the supporting documentation required to close the project out. Applicants have 90 days following the end date of the approved period of performance for their project to submit all required supporting documentation for that project to DISHES. Failure to provide the documentation within the required period will likely result in loss of funding, so please make sure that you are tracking your projects and comply with these requirements. A DISHES disaster assistance representative may be assigned to assist with your large project closeout. If you have any questions at any time, please contact the Disaster Assistance Manager immediately. FEMA may disallow costs and recover funds based on audit or review findings during or after the performance of the project to ensure compliance with PA program requirements. If funds that have been dispersed to an applicant are subsequently disallowed by FEMA, DISHES will recover those funds from the applicant and remit them to FEMA. FEMA may be required to recover funds if an applicant knowingly or negligently withholds or misrepresents material information, fails to complete the approved scope of work and comply with the terms of the grant, expends federal funds in error, or incurs costs that are unreasonable or otherwise disallowed. Applicants may appeal any FEMA determination within 60 days from the date of FEMA's transmission of the determination, such as the project obligation notification or a FEMA determination letter or memorandum. This 60-day deadline is for submitting your complete appeal package to DISHES in Grants Portal, not just a notice of the intent to appeal. The DISHES appeal team can assist you in developing your appeal if you promptly request our help. The small project reconciliation is a particular type of appeal. If you find that the estimate or cost on your small project combined were insufficient, you may file an appeal for a reconciliation. You must file the appeal in Grants Portal within 60 days of completing your last small project. FEMA will then review your actual costs on all your small projects. If there's a net cost overrun on all of your small projects combined, FEMA may obligate the additional funds. However, if it is found that you have met a net underrun, FEMA may de-obligate the overpayment. For this reason, applicants contemplating a request for a small project reconciliation are strongly encouraged to contact the Disaster Assistance Manager to request assistance. Exercising care in estimating small projects can minimize the need for these appeals, especially in the view of the increase of the small project threshold to $1 million. FEMA may transmit a determination memorandum or a letter via any method that confirms receipt, such as Grants Portal, certified or return receipt mail, or an email with a read receipt acknowledgement. For Disaster 4723, all appeals must be submitted electronically using FEMA's grants portal system. Accepting a Section 428 project limits the applicant's right to appeal that project. If you are considering a Section 428 alternative procedures project, please confer with DISH's staff regarding the parameters of 428 projects before making a commitment. There are two levels of appeal within the FEMA Public Assistance Program. The first level of appeal is to the FEMA Regional Administrator, which in our case is Region 2, with offices in New York City. The second level of appeal is available if the first appeal is unsuccessful and goes to the FEMA Assistant Administrator for the Recovery Directorate in Washington, D.C. An applicant can elect to go to arbitration in lieu of a second appeal if certain criteria are met. Please discuss this option with the DISH's appeals team if you're interested. While the applicant can elect to have legal counsel and expert witnesses in arbitration, those costs are not reimbursable. Applicants pursuing arbitration must file their petition directly with the Civil Board of Contract Appeals, not with DISH's or FEMA. Please consult the board's rules if you are considering arbitration. Again, the DISH's appeal team is available to assist when promptly requested. And here are some pitfalls to avoid. Please make sure that you follow all the procedures, guidelines, and regulations as we have said throughout this presentation. If you're not sure of something, raise the question to your disaster assistance manager and get the answer before you proceed. FEMA grants are subject to audit by both the New York State Office of the Inspector General and the DHS Office of the Inspector General. You must be able to produce the backup documentation on all your projects should you be audited. The documentation uploaded into the grants portal does not meet this requirement. You must maintain a complete file in your office for each of your projects. You will need a grants portal account. Submit your request for public assistance so DISH's can create your account for you and you can be approved as an applicant in Disaster 4723. Once your request for public assistance is approved, FEMA state personnel will be assigned to assist you in development of your project. Here's the DISH's contact information if you have any questions. And this last slide contains some additional resources for you to consider should you need more information on the recovery process. And once again, this presentation will be posted to the DISH's website, hopefully by this weekend. On behalf of FEMA and the state of New York, we look forward to assisting you in pursuing reimbursement under the Public Assistance Program. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Corinne Francini, who will moderate the questions.
Thank you, Trish. I'm just pulling up the questions here. Today, to answer questions, we have Chief of Public Assistance Field Staff Unit, Joe Colorati, and the Chief of our Administration Unit for Public Assistance, Joe Stinson. And I'm going to roll into the first question here. We have a question that first question. I am a highway superintendent for the town of Putnam Valley. I have a culvert that needs to be replaced due to the storm. Do I need to wait for FEMA to look at, or do I have any remediation to get the road open, or can I fix it till we have a replacement plan?
You do not, this is Joe Colorati speaking, you do not need to wait for FEMA to perform your repairs. However, you need to make sure that you document all of your repairs and all the actions that you're taking so that FEMA can make a determination of eligibility. If you're considering doing something that is outside the repair to pre-disaster condition that would need FEMA approval, in that case, you would have to wait for approval.
We have,
As my colleague pointed out, if you want to do a temporary repair in the meantime, you can do a category B, throw that culvert back in there, and then submit a category C to repair it later on.
we've had multiple questions on this. Will there be a copy of the slide deck and notes available? And will there be a recorded presentation?
Will there be a copy of the slide deck with the narrative? The answer is yes, we will be posting that. What was the second part?
Will there be a recording of the presentation? Yes.
Yes, it will be.
I just want to let everyone know that posted in the chat, there are two web pages. One is for our public assistance web page, and then one is a subpage of that public assistance web page. It's for the disaster itself. It is the DR 4723 page, and within that page, you'll be able to find the slides of the narrative as well as the presentation. And again, as Trish said, it may take a day or so for that to be up and running. Next question. We provided mutual aid affected by the event to municipalities in the form of manpower and garbage truck and truck garbage to a county solid waste transfer facility. Are the expenses for manpower and the equipment eligible for reimbursement?
They would be if they are used for eligible work and you have a document such as a mutual aid agreement with the providing entity. In that case, you would bill the municipality you provided the services to. They would then submit those costs and documentation to FEMA for reimbursement. Again, only for those services that were provided for use on eligible work for this event.
Next question. If we own and operate a hospital within Orange County, can we apply for repairs to the roof of the facility if it was caused by the storms on July 19th and July 10th?
Unfortunately not. FEMA establishes incident periods for every declaration. The one that is established for this declaration is July 9th and 10th. So all damages must have occurred as a result of the July 9th and 10th storm.
I'm not sure that July 19th might be a typo. They might have intended July 9th and 10th.
If you intended July 9th and 10th and you had damages to a hospital roof caused by the event, then those damages could be eligible.
Inundated and submerged roads. It was indicated that damage must be visible. Please comment on how this relates to latent damage.
Well, that's a real interesting question. This is Joe Svensson from Dishes. The inundated and submerged roads policy is a fairly new policy for us to deal with, and I don't think we've run into a situation yet where that has been brought up in the context of latent damages, which would be a case where the damages are not immediately visible. And to be honest, we're going to have to cross that bridge when we come to it, because FEMA policy does allow for an applicant to submit a claim for latent damages.
Next question. Can we expect the eligibility to be corrected to include July 1st and 2nd, when the majority of damage occurred in my town, Demora?
Again, unfortunately not. The incident period is established by FEMA, and for this declaration, it's July 9th and 10th, and all damages must have occurred during that period in order to be eligible.
Are photos of damaged roads required prior to reopening roads to traffic?
No, the photos are required to substantiate your damages. As far as opening roads to traffic, as Joe mentioned just briefly with the new policy, just be careful when you're opening roads that you allow sufficient time for those roads to dry out if they've been inundated by water.
Next question. Does Category G, Parks and Rec, cover snowmobile trails that were damaged during the storm? Bridges they also mentioned bridges washed away or damaged buildings. Trails were washed out, trees and branches were removed. et cetera. These maintained trails are registered with the Department of Parks.
If those are a man-made facility that you are maintaining, yeah, and you're an eligible applicant in an eligible facility, yes, they are eligible.
And we have a comment that says, I believe FEMA equipment listed date 2021 is the latest list published by FEMA. Is this the equipment applicants should be using for the disaster?
So I think Jim Serqua added some information to the conversation on that. Apparently, there was a new schedule of equipment rates published for 2023. However, it is only applicable to declarations on or after July 26th, 2023, and this disaster was declared prior to that. So we will confirm this with FEMA, but our understanding would be that the 2021 equipment rates would apply to this disaster.
Yes, and if you can establish a higher local rate that was in place prior to the disaster, you can use those rates in lieu of the FEMA rates.
And that also covers one of the other questions that's right underneath. I received new FEMA rates for 2023. Will these rates apply?
No, they do not, because they were in effect after the declaration date of this disaster.
Next question, where can we access all these directions and forms that are being referenced in this presentation?
So the vast majority of information that we cover in this presentation is covered in greater detail in the PAPA-G, the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide published by FEMA. There are copies of that on FEMA's website, on the DISH's website. You can also access it through Grants Portal, and I'm sure you can just Google FEMA Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide version 4, and you can download it from the internet. There are a few other policies that may be applicable to certain projects that are either available on our website or FEMA's website. If you have a question about a particular policy, please discuss that with the FEMA state team that will be assigned to you, and they can point you to it. And if it's later on in the disaster, after projects are obligated, you can forward those questions to the disaster assistance manager. They can help you out also.
Next question, what is the minimum threshold for a project?
$3,800. Eligible work must be at or above that threshold to be eligible. However, let me add that there are potential to add damages or combine damages where it makes sense. For example, road damages along a stretch of road can be combined into one project in order to facilitate making that threshold. Our teams will help you in formulating those projects and damages as best to suit your needs.
And I'd just like to point out, exception to the minimum project threshold, Category Z management costs and donated resource projects do not have to meet the minimum threshold.
I'm just going to skip down a couple of questions because it keeps in the same vein of project threshold. Is the project threshold based on the total project cost or on the portion of covered by FEMA?
It's based on the total eligible project cost as determined by FEMA.
Next question. I need clarification. We provided search and rescue assets with water rescue teams under mutual aid within our county and to a neighboring county. They were deployed and used. Are the associated equipment and labor costs recoverable?
They are under the mutual aid agreement, providing they were used for eligible work. So if you provided those resources to a county that was declared, you need to bill that county for those costs and resources, and then the county can submit to FEMA for reimbursement for the eligible costs.
Next question. If we are working with the SUCF and OGS, who will be making the submission? Is it us, ESF, or our partners?
That would be SUNY would be the applicant. That's for ESF?
Mm-hmm. Next question. It was recommended to me by another nonprofit that we went through a disaster a few years ago to hire a disaster assistance consultant to support the FEMA process. Can we do that now? Do I need to send it out to a competitive bid or contracting, or do we wait and see if we are eligible?
Again, it's up to you whether you use a consultant or not. If you wind up being an eligible applicant, those costs could be eligible under management costs. So you need to analyze your current situation, determine what your expenses are going to be, because if you have eligible projects, you can get up to 5% for management costs. So at this point, you want to make sure you analyze your damages before you go into contracts, unless you're prepared to pay for those costs that exceed the 5%.
Next question. Early in the presentation, you noted facilities to be eligible, they must, one, be used for a declared purpose at the time of the event. How does this apply to a field? For example, a turf baseball field that was not being used at the time because it was not in season for that sport, but was damaged due to the disaster. Would this be eligible?
That would be eligible. If you're talking about a field that is at a school but isn't being used at the moment but will be used seasonally, that is eligible. The use factor is applies to all facilities. So if that facility, for example, was abandoned and was not used anymore, then that would not be considered in use. A field that is being used for football or sports and seasonally would be considered in use.
I just want to circle back to the equipment rate question for a second. I understand we have Robert Holtz, who is the FEMA infrastructure branch director for this disaster, is on the presentation, so I'm going to ask if we can unmute him. And Bob, if you can hear me, can you confirm our understanding that the 2021 equipment rates would apply to this declaration?
Yeah, that's right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, it all comes back to, the dates and the disaster and which one applied, but, and they're all great questions. And Joe is probably the biggest expert we have on the phone. During the EC and the RSM, these questions come up again, and we will certainly answer them the best we can. And I know more questions will come. So I'm monitoring the chat as well. So without any specific questions to me, I'll turn it back to you.
Bob, before you go, just ask is there anything in the presentation or the Q&A so far that you feel the need to add to or elaborate on?
No, I think it's been great. And if I could give a shout out to someone, it'd be definitely Trish on having to read the whole thing. But I think she did a great job. And I've taken a lot of notes too to make sure we address at the EC and the RSM along with our state partners. I'm just confident together we'll get through this and it'll be a painless, in quotes, painless process.
Thank you, Bob.
Keeping in that same vein, we have a question that says, where can we get a copy of the equipment rate sheet? Where can we get an equipment rate sheet?
We will post that on our website. You can find it on the FEMA website, but we will post a copy on the DR 4723 website.
Joe, this is Jim Cirqua. I have posted a link to that in the chat.
Thank you, Jim.
If a county has a yearly contract with a rental equipment company for equipment, please comment on any issues that may arise when submitting a claim for rental equipment under this contract.
If the applicant has a yearly contract and then uses that equipment under that contract for a period of time, the cost will be prorated against the contract for the time the equipment was used for eligible work.
But like any contract, you will have to demonstrate that that contract was procured in compliance with federal, state, and local procurement requirements.
What about excessive flows associated with equipment failure, labor, et cetera, at a wastewater treatment facility?
If the equipment failure was caused by the event, then all actions necessary to address that failure would be eligible under FEMA.
Category G, Parks and Recreation. Would this include repairing damages to New York State conservation easements, snowmobile trails, culverts, bridges, and washouts?
Yes, if they are eligible facilities, they would be. If they are natural facilities, not. But if they are maintained facilities like the trails and things of that nature, yes, they would be eligible.
Will current grants portal accounts for previous disasters populate new disasters, or will it be separate?
It would be a separate disaster, not a separate account. You use your grants portal account, but you would have to file an RPA for this disaster in order to participate.
When you go into the portal, there should be a banner at the top of the screen that says to submit your request for public assistance.
A lot of info. What is the first step to apply for damaged equipment for a small volunteer fire department?
The first step is to file the request for public assistance.
And just to clarify, you were correct, SUNY admin for ESS. I do not see any other questions currently. The equipment rate sheet is posted in the chat. You want to hold it open for another minute, or?
Yeah, give it a few more minutes. Ask if anybody else has any other questions out there.
If there's any other questions, please again direct them to the chat. We're going to hold it open for one more minute.
Yeah, I think we want to hold it open for a minute so people can copy any of the links that were put in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And my email address is on the screen for, if you have any questions regarding the submitting your request for public assistance.
We had another question come in. Is submitting an RPA in grants portal sufficient?
Yes.
Yeah, you submit your RPA. If we have any questions about the supporting documentation, we'll be in contact with you to develop that information. And then once your RPA is approved by FEMA, then you'll be able to start entering, developing projects or entering your damage inventory list in grants portal. But just go back to the damage inventory list. You should go ahead and start surveying your jurisdiction to make sure you've identified all the potential damages that are a result of this declared event, so that when you're getting together with the FEMA state team on your projects, you have that information handy. Once you, as we mentioned in the presentation, once you have that recovery scoping meeting, there's a clock that starts ticking, 60 days to identify all damages. Don't wait until then to start creating your list of damages. Go ahead and take stock of what damages you may have in your jurisdiction.
And one more thing I want to emphasize to everybody, as I do a lot of these reviews on these disasters, you covered the consensus-based code specification standards policy. You need to look at that now. You are out there doing the work. If you perform the work and you fail to comply with that policy, and then you discover that you need to employ a certain code, and now it causes you to undo work, FEMA will not pay for that. So it's imperative that you consult that policy on those categories of work before you start your work, and make sure you do it when you develop your scope of work. In case it's triggered, it needs to be costed.
We had another question come in. Our village contracts with the company to provide our highway work. Is their work above their contract time eligible for reimbursement?
If you are contracting for certain work, and that contract meets the procurement procedures, the work that they do for eligible work, they need to separate that. And if it's a yearly contract, for example, you're going to get it prorated. If it's simply a contract that states that when there is damage to a road, the XY company comes in and repairs it, they need to bill you for that repair specifically outside of other regular work. FEMA will then make a determination if that work is eligible, reasonable, and necessary for that damage, and make an eligibility determination.
Just want to jump to a question real quick at the end here. We have two more come in. If you could repeat the name of the policy that you were just talking about, the consensus-based code.
It's certainly in the slide presentation, but we're talking about FEMA's, and I'll give you the policy number here. It's consensus-based code specifications and standards for public assistance. It's FEMA policy, recovery interim policy, F as in Frank, P-104-009-11, version 2. And we'll see if we can put it up on a slide for you. Okay, there it is on the slide if you want to copy it down.
The other question that came in is the threshold for projects $3,500? And someone in the chat actually answered it's $3,800 for minimum, the minimum threshold for a project.
$3,800 is correct.
Correct.
Don't see any other questions currently. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
I just wanted to say that when you're, you submit your request for public assistance, and then you have to wait for FEMA to approve your request. After that, you still can't enter any information in the portal until after your exploratory call and recovery scoping meeting. So once you're approved, a short time after that, FEMA and New York State will be reaching out to you to have the exploratory call and recovery scoping meeting. So you can't start entering stuff in the portal yet until after that.
If you have multiple projects and one is under 3,800, can it still be included in the total?
If it makes sense to combine the work, it can be combined on one project. If it's separate work, distinct, you cannot. It has to make sense. For example, like I said, if you got some road shoulder washouts along a stretch of the same highway and combining them meets the 3,800, that's logical and we could do it. If you have damages to a wastewater treatment plant and a separate road or two separate roads across the county from each other, then the answer is no.
Again, when you meet with the FEMA state staff in developing your projects, let them know about all of your damages,
Right.
and they will guide you in how to formulate those projects to maximize your eligible reimbursement.
That is correct. Capture everything, and at the recovery scoping meeting, the team will sit with you and formulate your damages into logical projects. Okay? And if they don't meet the criteria, that's the time that they will advise you. Any further questions?
Nope, nothing is coming in. Oh, wait, hold on. One just came in. If you do emergency work to keep a road open, would you get paid for that? Then can you do codes and standards work?
If you do emergency work that's necessary to open a road, for example, remove debris, push the debris to the side of the road to open a road for emergency vehicles, that's an eligible category B work. If then the road is damaged and needs repair, that would be permanent work, and you could do that afterwards. As far as codes and standards, you said codes and standards. Codes and standards would apply if they meet the criteria, as we mentioned in the presentation, or they are consensus-based codes and standards and specifications under the FEMA policy.
Currently, there are no other questions in the chat.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Mimi Weber, the Associate Deputy Commissioner, for closing remarks.
Just want to thank the team. It was a lot of information in a short period of time. The team is here to support everybody, so don't hesitate to reach out in case you have any questions. Thanks, and have a great afternoon, everyone.